The 10,063rd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation concerning the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Burundi, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Rwanda to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. On behalf of the Council, I welcome Her Excellency, Ms. Therese Kaikwamba Wagner, Minister for Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation, Francophonie, and Congolese Diaspora of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Mr. Jean-Pierre Lacroix, Under-Secretary General for Peace Operations, and Dr. Mohamed Javid Abdelmonaim, International President of the Médecins Sans Frontières. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw the attention of the Council members to document S/2025/779, the report of the Secretary General on the United Nations Organization Stabilization Mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. At this meeting, the Security Council will hear briefings by Mr. Lacroix, Ambassador Michael Imram Kanu, Permanent Representative of Sierra Leone to the United Nations and Chair of the Security Council Committee established pursuant to Resolution 1533 concerning the situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Dr. Javid Abdelmonaim. I now give the floor to Jean-Pierre Lacroix.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, distingués membres du Conseil, je vous remercie pour cette occasion d'informer le Conseil de sécurité sur la situation en République démocratique du Congo et sur les activités de la MONUSCO à la veille de vos délibérations sur le renouvellement du mandat de cette opération. Je souhaite également saluer la présence de son Excellence Madame Thérèse Kaikwamba Wagner, ministre des Affaires étrangères, de la coopération internationale et de la francophonie de la République démocratique du Congo, ainsi que la présence des représentants de la République du Rwanda et du Burundi. Je salue également la participation de la Sierra Leone en sa qualité de président du comité du Conseil de sécurité établi en vertu de la résolution 1533, ainsi que celle du Dr Mohamed Javid Abdelmonaim, président international de Médecins sans frontières. Monsieur le Président, comme l'indique le dernier rapport du secrétaire général, la République démocratique du Congo continue à faire face à une crise sécuritaire et humanitaire dont les populations civiles dans les zones affectées sont les premières victimes. Ces derniers jours, la nouvelle offensive lancée par l'AFC M23 dans le Sud-Kivu a réveillé le spectre d'un embrasement régional aux conséquences incalculables. Les développements récents font peser un risque sérieux de fragmentation de la République démocratique du Congo, notamment dans sa partie orientale. L'expansion territoriale de l'AFC M23, l'établissement d'administrations parallèles et l'affaiblissement de la présence étatique dans certaines zones alimentent une dynamique qui menace directement l'unité, la souveraineté et l'intégrité territoriale de la République démocratique du Congo. Parallèlement, le conflit connaît une régionalisation de plus en plus marquée. L'implication directe ou indirecte de forces et de groupes armés en provenance de pays voisins ainsi que les mouvements transfrontaliers de populations déplacées et de combattants accroissent considérablement le risque d'un embrasement régional. Cette évolution ne menace pas uniquement la stabilité de l'Est de la RDC, mais celle de l'ensemble de la région des Grands Lacs. Au cours des derniers mois, pourtant, d'importantes avancées diplomatiques avaient été enregistrées. La signature des accords de Washington entre la RDC et le Rwanda le 4 décembre, l'accord cadre de Doha conclu le 15 novembre entre le gouvernement de la République démocratique du Congo et l'AFC M23, ainsi que l'accord du 14 octobre établissant un mécanisme conjoint de surveillance et de vérification du cessez-le-feu, témoignaient d'une forte mobilisation régionale et internationale en faveur de solutions politiques permettant l'instauration d'une paix durable dans l'Est de la RDC. Je saisis l'occasion pour saluer l'engagement du Qatar, des États-Unis et du médiateur de l'Union africaine, son Excellence le président Faure Gnassingbé, qui ont permis ces avancées. Et je réaffirme le plein soutien des Nations Unies, y compris bien sûr la MONUSCO, aux efforts de paix en cours. Les développements récents au Sud-Kivu illustrent de manière indéniable l'écart qui existe entre les efforts diplomatiques et la réalité vécue par les populations civiles frappées par les hostilités persistantes. Dans ce contexte, l'application sans atermoiement de la résolution 2773 du Conseil de sécurité, qui appelle entre autres un cessez-le-feu immédiat et inconditionnel, et le respect par les parties des engagements pris dans le cadre des processus de Washington et Doha, reste essentiel pour que les avancées diplomatiques puissent enfin se traduire par une amélioration tangible de la situation sur le terrain. Si ces avancées diplomatiques récentes ont suscité un espoir réel, les violations persistantes du cessez-le-feu, la reprise des hostilités font peser un risque d'effondrement des efforts diplomatiques en cours. L'écart grandissant entre les engagements pris au niveau politique et leur mise en œuvre effective sur le terrain mine la crédibilité des processus de paix, fragilise la confiance entre les parties et alimente le sentiment d'abandon ressenti par les populations civiles. Sans mesures concrètes et immédiates pour faire respecter les accords conclus, les dynamiques de conflit risquent de fermer la voie du dialogue.
Monsieur le Président,
Nord-Kivu, which is no longer within MONUSCO's area of operation, the AFC M23 advances in Uvira territory and its reporting capturing of Uvira town on the 9th of December with the alleged support of the Rwandese Defense Forces, RDF, has triggered a major military escalation just days after the signing of the Washington Accords. Congolese forces, alongside Burundian forces and local Wazalendo militia, have reportedly engaged in large-scale hostilities involving the use of heavy artillery and air power. These clashes have resulted in military and civilian casualties, destruction of infrastructure, and significant population displacement, including into neighboring Burundi. In Nord-Kivu, the AFC M23 has continued to pursue its strategy of territorial expansion and further consolidation of parallel administration in areas under its control, in clear violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Meanwhile, across Nord-Kivu and Ituri, civilians continue to face grave threats from a range of armed groups, both foreign and Congolese. In Lubero territory in Nord-Kivu, the Allied Democratic Forces, ADF, killed at least 132 civilians during the month of November alone. In Ituri, Codeco, Zaire, and CRP fighters continue to operate near major displacement camps, where MONUSCO is alone in providing direct physical protection for more than 100,000 displaced persons. Mr. President, since SRSG Keita's last briefing to this Council, the United Nations Joint Human Rights Office has continued to document numerous grave violations and abuses, including conflict-related sexual violence committed by armed groups and state actors. Women and children are disproportionately affected, and cases of forced displacement, sexual violence, arbitrary killings, and abductions remain widespread. In areas under AFC/M23 control, restrictions on MONUSCO's access continue to impede its ability to fully monitor, investigate, and report on violations, as mandated by this Council.
Mr. President, in this context marked by intensifying threats, the prevention of violence against civilians,
La prévention des violences contre les populations civiles constitue un pilier central de l'action de la MONUSCO. Au Nord-Kivu, comme en Ituri, la mission a renforcé son approche préventive, fondée sur la présence dissuasive, l'anticipation des risques et l'engagement étroit avec les communautés. En Ituri, où les groupes armés opèrent à proximité immédiate de sites déplacés, la MONUSCO maintient des patrouilles quotidiennes et des dispositifs d'alerte communautaire qui ont permis de prévenir plusieurs attaques et de protéger des zones particulièrement vulnérables. Au Nord-Kivu, la mission poursuit la mise en place de systèmes d'alerte précoce et de patrouilles mobiles renforcées, en particulier dans les zones exposées à l'expansion de l'AFC M23 et aux attaques ciblées des ADF. La MONUSCO veille également à maintenir un dialogue constant avec les communautés, y compris les femmes et les jeunes, afin de s'assurer que la protection fournie répond pleinement à leurs besoins et réalités sur le terrain. Mr. President, the humanitarian situation is equally alarming. Continued hostilities, repeated waves of displacement, the ongoing closure of Goma and Kavumu airports and shrinking humanitarian access have compounded an already severe crisis. Around 5.35 million people are displaced within the country. Since January alone, 2.68 million people have been newly displaced, while 2.9 million have returned forcibly or voluntarily. More than 24 million people face acute food insecurity. At the same time, humanitarian agencies are facing crippling funding shortfalls. As of today, the humanitarian response plan for the DRC is only 22% funded. The consequences of these funding gaps are devastating. In this challenging environment, MONUSCO has remained undeterred in its determination to deliver on its mandated priority tasks amidst numerous constraints, both operational and financial. The implementation of the contingency measures aimed at managing the peacekeeping-wide liquidity crisis is now largely completed. The mission has taken every possible step to mitigate the impact of these measures on its ability to protect civilians in its area of operations and deliver on other mandated priority tasks. To this end, the mission has sought to enhance the mobility of its remaining units and increase joint patrols with the FARDC and the Congolese National Police in Ituri, while striving to maintain a robust presence around vulnerable IDP sites. MONUSCO's police component also continues to reinforce accountability and community policing, notably through strengthened cooperation with the General Inspectorate of the Congolese National Police. Nonetheless, the unavoidable reduction in uniform and civilian personnel required to keep the mission financially afloat will have an inevitable impact on its rapid response capacity and operational reach. In Ituri, the mission remains the primary source of physical protection for approximately 100,000 people living in IDP sites within the immediate vicinity of MONUSCO bases. Efforts to reintegrate ex-combatants through community-based initiatives continue as part of the broader effort to create a protective environment for civilians in the province. In Chomia, Jugu territory, MONUSCO, working with the Disarmament, Demobilization, Community Reintegration and Stabilization Process, the PDDRCS, has launched a project that supports 257 people, including 89 ex-combatants, through vocational training and community work, strengthening food security and social cohesion. In the Grand Nord of Nord-Kivu, MONUSCO peacekeepers regularly conduct joint patrols with the Congolese armed forces, deter armed groups' activity, and sustain a protective presence along key roads and access routes. In Goma, the AFC/M23 restrictions on the supply of fuel, water, and electricity continue to pose a significant challenge for MONUSCO and its personnel. While the recent release of several impounded diesel trucks is a welcome development, the mission remains reliant on generators and water trucks to sustain essential services. Freedom of movement restrictions continue to delay planned rotations, although its constant engagement with the mission's constant engagement with the AFC/M23 has enabled the complete rotation of the Uruguayan and Moroccan contingents. Efforts to reopen Goma Airport in support of humanitarian flights have not yet yielded results. While MONUSCO's leadership continues to engage with all relevant stakeholders to lift these restrictions, the active support of this Council remains essential to enable the mission to regain its full freedom of action. Despite these constraints, MONUSCO personnel continue to carry out their duties with professionalism and resilience. The mission has enhanced situational awareness and reaction times and maintained a dynamic, proactive posture to deter threats against civilians and adapt to evolving risks. Since the beginning of the year, MONUSCO has facilitated the repatriation of more than 80 foreign ex-combatants affiliated with the FDLR and over 127 dependents in coordination with the Rwanda Demobilization and Reintegration Commission. Determined to leverage its capabilities and expertise in support of ongoing peace efforts, MONUSCO has also intensified efforts to support disarmament and repatriation in Masisi, Walikale, and Rutshuru in support of the FARDC's call for the voluntary surrender of the FDLR. DDR specialists will be co-located at the mission's bases in Kiwanja and Kinshasa in AFC/M23 controlled territory. The transit camp in Munigi on the outskirts of Goma remains operational, while a new transit site is being established in Sake. Mr. President, the days and weeks ahead will be decisive. Ongoing diplomatic efforts offer a clear pathway towards a lasting political settlement that will bring a long-awaited measure of relief to the millions of Congolese affected by successive cycles of conflict. These must be sustained and intensified to prevent further escalation and lay the foundation for lasting peace, stability, and prosperity in the DRC and the broader Great Lakes region. MONUSCO stands ready to leverage its expertise and capabilities in support of current peace efforts, which are fully consistent with its current mandated priority tasks. The mission is also gearing up to contribute to ceasefire monitoring and observation efforts, should the Council entrust it with this task. The mission has participated actively in the 3 meetings of the ceasefire observation and monitoring mechanism that have been convened since the signing of the 14 October agreement between the government of the DRC and the M23, which established the mechanism. Plans are already in place, which the mission will continue to refine as the contours of the ceasefire, the functioning of the observation and monitoring mechanism, and the full implication of its involvement become clearer. At this critical juncture, it is essential that the Security Council do its utmost to create the conditions necessary for MONUSCO to play its role in protecting civilians while meeting the growing expectation related to its role in supporting ongoing efforts, of course, should there be an implementation of the commitment made in Washington and Doha. It is also vital that Member States ensure that the mission is provided with the necessary resources to deliver on its core mandated responsibilities. As the Secretary General has underscored in his report, MONUSCO remains an essential component of the broader international effort to resolve the crisis in Eastern DRC and lay the foundation for lasting peace and stability in the Great Lakes region. Support to ongoing peace efforts, together with the protection of civilians, disarmament and demobilization, strengthening and security institutions, and human rights monitoring should form the core of the mission mandate. In renewing MONUSCO's mandate, I encourage the Council to redouble effort to create the conditions necessary for effective implementation, including full compliance by all parties with Resolution 2773 and the lifting of restrictions on the mission's freedom of movement. Président, distingués membres du Conseil, les avancées diplomatiques doivent désormais se traduire par des améliorations réelles sur le terrain, afin que le peuple congolais puisse enfin entrevoir la sécurité et la stabilité auxquelles il aspire. À ce moment critique, le rôle du Conseil de sécurité est plus déterminant que jamais. Une réaction claire, unie et résolue du Conseil est essentielle pour prévenir une aggravation du conflit, enrayer les risques de fragmentation de la RDC et contenir la régionalisation croissante des violences. Le Conseil dispose des outils politiques et normatifs nécessaires pour faire respecter ces résolutions, soutenir les efforts de médiation en cours et envoyer un message sans équivoque à toutes les parties quant à l'impératif du respect du cessez-le-feu, du droit international humanitaire et de la souveraineté de la République démocratique du Congo. Et la MONUSCO, quant à elle, poursuivra la mise en œuvre de son mandat avec professionnalisme et détermination. Avec le soutien de ce Conseil, elle est prête à contribuer pleinement aux efforts de paix en cours. Je vous remercie.
Je remercie M. Lacroix de son intervention et je donne la parole à l'ambassadeur Michael Iman-Kano.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, colleagues, I have the honor to deliver a statement in my capacity as Chair of the Security Council Committee established pursuant to Resolution 1533 concerning the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It is my intention to provide an overview of the work of the committee since my last briefing on 27 June 2025. Mr. President, since the last briefing, the committee held 3 informal consultations in 2025. During the meeting held on 2nd July 2025, the coordinator of the group of experts provided an overview of the main findings and recommendations contained in the group's final report, following which committee members discussed the findings and recommendations contained therein. During the meeting held on 20th October 2025, the coordinator of the group of experts provided an overview of the program of work of the group of experts, considering Resolution 2783. During the meeting held on 27th October 2025, the committee received a briefing by the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs on behalf of the Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, pursuant to paragraph 5 of the Resolution 2664. Mr. President, in accordance with paragraph 115 of the note by the President of the Security Council, dated 13th December 2024, the committee issued 2 press releases containing a brief summary of the informal consultations held respectively on 2nd July and 20th October. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Ambassador Imran Kano for his briefing. I now give the floor to Dr. Mohamed Javid Abdelmonem.
Thank you, Mr. President, for the invitation to brief this Council on the humanitarian situation in the Eastern DRC. Excellencies, good morning. Mr. President, allow me to begin with a truth this Council must acknowledge. Despite the appearance of political momentum in recent months, and despite the signing of peace agreements, MSF teams continue to witness staggering levels of violence, displacement, and deprivation in the Kivus and Ituri. Our patients describe fleeing bombed villages and extreme brutality. From MSF's vantage point in hospitals, clinics, and displacement sites, the picture is unambiguous. This crisis is not easing. Health systems are collapsing, sexual violence is widespread, and humanitarian access and funding are shrinking as needs rise. The gap between political signaling and lived reality of millions is widening. In fact, the ink has barely dried on the agreement signed in Washington, and M23 has already launched a sweeping offensive in Uvira, driving an estimated 200,000 people from their homes, 40,000 of them into Burundi. Stark evidence that the promise of peace is masking a landscape of persistent large-scale violence. It is increasingly clear that ongoing peace efforts are serving to consolidate the extractive interests of powerful actors rather than to bring the people of DRC relief. None of this is new. The violence communities face is rooted in decades of resource predation and structural neglect. This is the enduring tragedy. Generation after generation of Congolese have seen their lives and dignity sacrificed at the altar of politics and profit. Until civilians are no longer treated as expendable, no political process will bring real relief. Mr. President, despite high-level commitments in Washington and Doha, violence against civilians remains routine. Both state forces and non-state armed groups, including M23, FDLR, ADF, elements of the FARDC and their Wazalendo allies, continue to endanger civilians and obstruct access to care. All have been implicated in grave violations of international humanitarian law, summary killings, sexual violence, looting, and blocking humanitarian assistance. The toll is devastating. In Binza, MSF patients described men cut down in the fields and women and children shot along the riverbank, their bodies left to drift downstream, testimonies which echo wider reports of massacres in Nord-Kivu. Several of our patients said these attacks were carried out by members of M23. In Rutshuru Hospital, trauma admissions rose by 67% in July. More than 80% of gunshot victims admitted to MSF-supported facilities in July and August were civilians. In Ituri, over the course of this year, we have carried out more than 1,500 trauma surgeries in one single hospital, most for wounds related to conflict. Medical facilities and staff are not spared. Ambulances have been stopped at gunpoint, and armed actors have stormed medical facilities, threatening and terrorizing both patients and staff. In Masisi, just 2 weeks ago, the Kazinga Health Center, clearly marked with MSF insignia, was looted and destroyed by a Wazalendo militia. 3 MSF colleagues have been killed this year. These violations underscore a profound failure to protect civilians. Mr. President, sexual violence in Eastern DRC is a long-standing emergency which has scarred communities for decades. Today, it continues at an unimaginable scale. In the first 6 months of this year alone, nearly 28,000 survivors sought care in MSF-supported facilities in Eastern DRC. That's an average of 155 survivors each and every day for 6 months. 3 out of 4 attacks are committed by armed individuals. Attacks occur in fields, on roads, at water points, and inside homes. Many survivors reach care too late for preventative treatment. Many never reach it at all. At the same time, essential medical supplies are running dangerously low. In North and South Kivu, half of all health zones lack post-exposure prophylaxis, leaving survivors without the critical care that could prevent infection, avert unwanted pregnancy, and reduce long-term harm. The scale and normalization of sexual violence reflect a profound collapse of community protection and a near total absence of accountability. Women and girls tell us that sexual violence is not simply feared, it is expected. Mr. President, the health system is collapsing under the combined weight of violence, chronic neglect, mass displacement, aid cuts, and emerging parallel administrations. In many areas, up to 85% of facilities face critical drug shortages, nearly 40% of health personnel have left their posts, and more than half of facilities we have evaluated have closed or been damaged. The consequences are lethal. In Walikale, deaths of severely malnourished children arriving within 24 and 48 hours of admission rose by 89% and 309% compared to last year. Families arrive far too late, delayed by insecurity, cost, and the absence of functioning care. Preventative health services have crumbled, and vaccination is repeatedly disrupted, leading to an upsurge in preventable infectious diseases. Cholera cases already exceed 38,000, and deaths have more than doubled compared to last year. Measles continues to spread. A malaria outbreak of unknown proportions is unfolding, while neither diagnostics nor essential treatments are available to contain it. Mr. President, as needs grow, the space to deliver humanitarian assistance is contracting. Across Eastern DRC, state and non-state actors alike impose restrictions unrelated to civilian needs. Life-saving assistance is delayed, diverted, or blocked. The closure of the Goma and Bukavu airstrips and the failure of Kinshasa and M23 to reach an agreement to reopen them has reduced entry points for supplies and personnel into Eastern DRC and slowed movements within the Kivus. Reaching Walikale can now take more than a month during the rainy season. Shifting conflict lines have also meant that delivering supplies from Bukavu to Uvira has required crossing 4 international borders at 4 times the previous cost. Humanitarian access is not optional, it's a legal obligation. Airports must be reopened, and passage along key routes must be secured, and medical and humanitarian supplies must move without impediment. On top of the collapse of civilian protection and the erosion of access, major donors are cutting support and eliminating life-saving services in full view of surging needs. Mr. President, commitments made in capitals mean little when they are not matched with concrete measures on the ground. We make 3 calls. First, civilian protection must be placed at the center of all political and diplomatic engagement. Progress cannot be measured by the number of agreements signed, but by whether people are safer in their homes, on the roads they travel, and in the places they seek care. Second, humanitarian access must be upheld, not as a gesture of goodwill or a confidence-building measure, but as a moral obligation underpinned by international humanitarian law. Third, the humanitarian response must be resourced at the level this crisis demands. Without flexible, timely funding, preventable deaths will continue to mount. In conclusion, Mr. President, from where we stand, beside patients, not behind podiums, these debates do not lack awareness, they lack consequence. This Council is regularly briefed on the situation in DRC. Members are able to describe violations civilians face with precision, even as those violations continue unchecked. For people living through this conflict, the question is not whether this Council understands their reality, it is why that understanding so rarely translates into meaningful protection. This disconnect is damning, and that failure is profound. If this Council cannot act when so many lives are at stake, then the promise of civilian protection becomes a hollow doctrine, recited here, but absent where it is most needed. What is required today is neither new rhetoric nor new diplomatic architecture. It is the will to insist that civilians are not expendable and that their rights to safety and dignity are non-negotiable. Not in DRC, not anywhere civilians are under threat. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Dr. Javid Abdelmonaim for his briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, je remercie tout d'abord le secrétaire général adjoint pour les opérations de paix, Monsieur Jean-Pierre Lacroix, ainsi que le président de Médecins sans frontières, Monsieur le docteur Mohamed Javid Abdelmomein, pour leurs remarques extrêmement éclairantes. Je remercie également le représentant permanent de la Sierra Leone, M. Michael Kanou, pour son exposé au titre de la présidence du comité 1533 de sanctions sur la situation en République démocratique du Congo. Je salue enfin la présence de la ministre d'État, la ministre des Affaires étrangères de la République démocratique du Congo, son Excellence Madame Thérèse Kayigwamba-Wagner, ainsi que la présence des représentants du Rwanda et du Burundi. Nous nous réunissons alors que le M23, soutenu par les forces rwandaises de défense, a lancé une offensive sur Uvira cette semaine, quelques jours à peine après la signature de l'accord de Washington le 4 décembre. Cette situation ne peut qu'interpeller le Conseil au moment même où ses membres délibèrent sur le renouvellement du mandat de la MONUSCO. Et j'insisterai à ce point sur 3 messages. Tout d'abord, l'offensive du M23, soutenue par les forces rwandaises de défense, met en péril la stabilité régionale et compromet la sécurité des civils. La prise de la ville d'Uvira dans le Sud-Kivu, frontalière du Burundi, emporte des risques sérieux et imminents d'escalade régionale et menace directement la sécurité de pays frontaliers. Le recours à des drones suicides constitue une escalade préoccupante. Ces combats ont entraîné le déplacement forcé de dizaines de milliers de civils, dégradant encore la situation alors qu'il s'agit déjà dans cette zone de la 2e crise humanitaire la plus grave du monde. La communauté internationale s'est mobilisée pour venir en aide aux populations touchées par le conflit. Lors de la conférence de Paris le 30 octobre dernier, la France réaffirme l'urgence de protéger les populations civiles. La France exhorte le M23 à mettre un terme à son offensive et les forces rwandaises de défense à se retirer du territoire congolais en application de la résolution 2673 adoptée à l'unanimité par ce Conseil. Le M23 doit respecter ses engagements au titre de la déclaration de principe et de l'accord-cadre de Doha. Deuxièmement, dans ce contexte, la France réaffirme sa confiance aux médiateurs. L'Union africaine, en particulier à travers les présidents de l'Angola et du Togo, les États-Unis et le Qatar, déploient des efforts immenses pour un règlement durable du conflit, qui endeuille les populations des Grands Lacs et qui déstabilise gravement la région depuis des décennies. Plus que jamais, le soutien de l'ensemble des membres de ce Conseil à ces efforts de paix est requis. Nous devons collectivement réaffirmer l'exigence du respect du droit international humanitaire par l'ensemble des parties, ainsi que leurs obligations en matière de protection des civils. La résolution 2773 doit être pleinement appliquée et respectée par l'ensemble des acteurs, à commencer par son appel à un cessez-le-feu inconditionnel, effectif et vérifiable. Le respect de la souveraineté et de l'intégrité territoriale congolaise est non négociable. Les actions provocatrices ou les discours de haine mettant en péril la sécurité des civils doivent cesser. Les accords de Washington doivent être respectés. L'accord-cadre de Doha doit être appliqué. Nous appelons à la poursuite des efforts de l'Union africaine. Les récents événements risquent de mettre un terme à un règlement politique durable du conflit. Troisième message. Nous ne devons pas laisser cette situation remettre en cause le mandat de la MONUSCO et les négociations en cours. Comme l'a rappelé le secrétaire général adjoint, la MONUSCO continue de jouer un rôle essentiel en matière de protection des civils et dans la perspective de du règlement du conflit. La France, en tant que porte-plume, a présenté un projet destiné à positionner la MONUSCO dans un rôle d'accompagnement de tous les efforts de paix. Cela comprend la question de la surveillance d'un cessez-le-feu, pour laquelle la MONUSCO dispose d'atouts évidents par la présence sur le terrain, son expertise, ses capacités et son impartialité. Les entraves imposées par le M23 à sa liberté d'action et à son approvisionnement en ressources de première nécessité sont inacceptables et doivent cesser. Dès lors, nous appelons les membres du Conseil à poursuivre les négociations de bonne foi, en gardant à l'esprit la responsabilité qui leur incombe au regard de la situation présente et en sachant que toute l'attention de cette délégation est acquise. Monsieur le Président, les populations de l'Est de la République démocratique du Congo, les pays de la région et les contributeurs de troupes attendent du Conseil qu'il se montre à la hauteur de ses responsabilités au regard de l'urgence. Sachons répondre à cette attente pour la paix en République démocratique du Congo et dans la région. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you again, Mr. President. Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver the statement on behalf of the A3+ members, namely Algeria, Guyana, Somalia, and my own country, Sierra Leone. We wish to thank Under-Secretary General Jean-Pierre Lacroix and Mr. Javid Abdelnomen for their briefings on the situation on the ground. We welcome the participation of Her Excellency Mr. Kaikwamba Wagner, Minister of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation, and Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and the representatives of Rwanda and Burundi to this meeting. Over the past 3 decades, MONUSCO and its predecessor mission, MONUC, have been present in the DRC, supporting efforts for peace, stabilization, and the protection of civilians in a context marked by recurring armed conflict, complex humanitarian challenges, and a major political transition. The A3+ reiterate our deep appreciation to the mission for its continued service and dedication to the Congolese people under extraordinary challenges. Yet, as we meet today, peace and stability in the DRC remain volatile despite sustained regional and international diplomatic efforts. We would also like to express our profound appreciation to Ms. Bintou Keita, SISG in the DRC and head of MONUSCO, for her leadership and commitment to advancing peace and stability in the DRC. Our dedicated service to the Congolese people, particularly our efforts to safeguard and support civilians, have been invaluable. Mr. President, the recent development in Eastern DRC, most notably the fall of Uvira City, the last major settlement in Sud-Kivu, to the M23 AFC rebels, is profoundly alarming. Even more alarming is the worsening humanitarian situation for the civilian population who have been displaced, fleeing across the borders in search of safety and potentially creating pressures for receiving countries. We underscore the importance of supporting these countries as they serve as safe havens for those fleeing the violence in the DRC. The A3+ remains gravely alarmed by the humanitarian situation in the DRC, which has long been among the worst, most severe. The renewed offensive in Sud-Kivu risks overwhelming an already overstretched and critically underfunded humanitarian system. With over 5.7 million people internally displaced and an estimated 24.8 million facing food insecurity amid acute security and access constraints. Humanitarian personnel cannot sustain operations under continued hostilities in Sud-Kivu. Reports from international humanitarian organizations on the ground are also alarming. According to the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, nearly 200,000 people have been displaced, with women and children bearing the greatest burden of this renewed violence. It is thus absolutely necessary for this Council to act decisively to halt the escalation of the conflict in Eastern DRC. In view of this, we must remind all parties to the conflict of their obligations under international human rights law and international humanitarian law to protect civilians during conflict. Mr. President, the A3+ further reiterates that the solution to this conflict remains fundamentally political. We are therefore encouraged by last week's signing of the Washington Accords for Peace and Prosperity by Presidents Felix Tshisekedi and Paul Kagame, witnessed by African leaders, including President João Lourenço of Angola and Chairperson of the African Union, President Faure Gnassingbé, President of the Council of Ministers of Togo, and the African Union appointed mediator of the crisis between the DRC and Rwanda, and President His Excellency Mohamed Ali Yusuf, Chairperson of the African Union Commission. As underscored by the AU Chairperson, and I quote, "The Washington Accords represent an important moment to put an end to a conflict that has lasted for more than 3 decades, a conflict between brothers and neighboring countries who, for various reasons, have been fighting one another over the years with heavy consequences both for the population and the economies of their respective countries." End of quote. The A3+ fully echoes this sentiment and reaffirms its strong support for the leadership and mediation effort of African stakeholders. We therefore urge all parties to honor their recent commitment undertaken in Doha and Washington, D.C., and to work in good faith towards lasting peace, stability, and prosperity throughout the Great Lakes region. Mr. President, the renewed offensive in Sud-Kivu comes at a time when the Council is discussing the future of the presence of the United Nations peacekeeping mission in the DRC. In light of the current realities on the ground, discussion on MONUSCO's future must be approached with the utmost care and with the interests of the people of the Great Lakes region at the center. The safety of their lives and livelihoods and enabling their prosperity must guide our decision on the renewal and the orientation of the new MONUSCO mandate. After decades of conflict, and I quote, "business as usual," end of quote, approach is no longer tenable. A genuine paradigm shift is needed, one that reimagines the United Nations presence in ways that reinforce African-led proposals and that of the Doha and Washington processes. Harmonizing these proposals will require sincere engagement and understanding of African perspective, moving beyond symbolic acknowledgement towards meaningful inclusion of African solutions. Mr. President, to conclude, the A3+ is of the view that in renewing the mandate of MONUSCO, the mission must be provided with the necessary operational flexibility to support implementation of the mandate, not only in terms of protecting civilians, but where appropriate, deployment and targeted return to critical areas currently lacking a permanent presence of governmental authority. Additionally, the mandate should strengthen MONUSCO's role in supporting transitional justice and accountability for war crimes and crimes against humanity. The A3+ stands firmly in solidarity with the Congolese people and all affected communities in the region. With the resilience and unity of the Congolese people, supported by regional mechanisms and international effort, we believe that a sustained solution to this conflict is within reach. The A3+ will continue to offer its unwavering support towards the realization of these aspirations. And I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to our briefers today. Colleagues, President Trump was pleased to have convened DRC President Tshisekedi and Rwandan President Kagame in Washington on December 4th for the signing of the Washington Accords and the Regional Economic Integrated Framework. It was a true and sincere demonstration and effort towards peace. However, peace processes require parties to uphold their commitments to that very process. And the United States is profoundly concerned and incredibly disappointed with the renewed outbreak of violence in the eastern DRC. Today, I want to share with you some additional information on the scope and the sophistication of Rwanda's involvement in eastern DRC. Since its reemergence in 2021, Rwanda has had strategic control of its proxy armed group, M23, as well as M23's political wing, the Congo River Alliance, or AFC, and has deployed M23 and the AFC to achieve Rwanda's geopolitical goals in eastern DRC. Kigali has been intimately involved in planning and executing the war in eastern DRC, providing military and political direction to M23 forces and AFC for years now. The Rwandan Defense Forces have provided materiel, logistics, and training support to M23, as well as fighting alongside M23 in DRC with roughly 5,000 to 7,000 troops as of early December. This is not counting the possible increases from Rwanda in this most recent advancement. In more recent months, Rwanda has deployed multiple surface-to-air missiles and other heavy and sophisticated weaponry into North and South Kivu to aid M23 in its conflict against DRC. Rwanda and M23 began their offensive just this last weekend to take Uvira, with Rwandan forces co-located with M23 along the front lines. Additionally, we have credible reports of increased use of suicide drones, increased use of artillery by both M23 and Rwanda, including strikes into Burundi. So rather than a march towards peace, as we saw under President Trump's leadership in recent weeks, Rwanda is leading the region towards increased instability and war. And in light of the commitments made in the Washington Accords, we are deeply concerned that the Rwandan military's continued presence in Congolese territory in support of M23, and we will use the tools at our disposal to hold to account spoilers to peace. We call on Rwanda to uphold its commitments and to further recognize the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo's right to defend its territory and its sovereign right to invite Burundian forces onto its territory. We are engaging with all sides to urge restraint and to avoid further escalation, including refraining from hostile anti-Tutsi rhetoric. As this council negotiates the MONUSCO mandate, the United States will seek to ensure the mission has the capabilities to provide support to both the Doha and Washington agreements, keeping in mind that the parties themselves bear full responsibility for their successful implementation, and we look for the members of this council's support as we negotiate this mandate's renewal. MONUSCO's ability to provide critical enabling support to these processes, however, hinges entirely on its ability to move freely, to sustain itself, to implement its mandate without interference. And the fact that UN peacekeeping forces are under siege by forces backed by a member state that itself is a troop contributor to peacekeeping missions, frankly, is a sad hypocrisy. Unfortunately, M23's months-long blockade on MONUSCO has undermined its ability to operate effectively in and out of Goma, as many representatives have stated here today. And for its part, Rwanda continues to deploy surface-to-air missiles and additionally conduct spoofing and jamming operations, which have effectively grounded MONUSCO air operations. So how can MONUSCO succeed under these conditions? We demand the immediate end of such obstruction, which violates M23 and Rwanda's obligations under both the Doha and Washington agreements, respectively. We remain steadfast in our support of MONUSCO and its role in the realization of these historic agreements, which we believe hold great potential to end the decades of suffering in Eastern DRC. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Nous remercions le secrétaire général adjoint, Jean-Pierre Lacroix, de son intervention. Nous remercions le représentant permanent de la Sierra Leone en sa qualité de président du comité 1533. Nous avons écouté avec attention le docteur Mohamed Javid Abdelmoneim. Nous saluons la participation de la ministre des Affaires étrangères, de la coopération internationale et de la diaspora, Madame Wagner, et nous saluons la présence du Burundi et du Rwanda. Malheureusement, cette séance se tient alors qu'il y a une escalade dans le Sud-Kivu suite à l'offensive du M23. Nous avons dit maintes fois que nous suivons avec préoccupation l'évolution des événements dans cette province. Uvira, qui est à la frontière avec le Burundi, est menacée depuis quelques mois d'encerclement et d'offensive de la part du M23. Cette situation, quelques jours après le sommet à Washington, montre à nouveau que la diplomatie internationale n'apporte pas de résultats sensibles et n'influe pas sur la situation sur le terrain de manière substantielle. Nous ne constatons pas de cessez-le-feu ou d'armistice. Cela reste lettre morte. La région des Grands Lacs se rapproche de plus en plus d'un affrontement armé interétatique de grande ampleur. Nous appelons à un cessez-le-feu et à se concentrer sur des mesures réelles pour régler la crise et permettre des conditions normales pour les civils de tous les pays de la région. Le Rwanda et la RDC doivent commencer à exécuter la résolution 2773 et cesser de coopérer avec le M23 et les FDLR. Tant que ces ingrédients élémentaires seront ignorés, la situation ne fera que se dégrader. Je souligne que nous appuyons tous les efforts internationaux qui visent une fin du conflit armé à l'est de la RDC et une paix durable tant attendue pour les Congolais et leurs voisins. Il ne doit pas y avoir de doute là-dessus. Toutefois, les accords signés à Washington et Doha doivent être évalués à l'aune de la manière dont ils sont exécutés. La situation dans le Sud-Kivu montre le rapport réel des acteurs du processus de négociation, le rapport réel des acteurs vis-à-vis du processus de négociation, malgré les signatures qu'ils ont imposées. De nombreux casques bleus ont perdu la vie dans l'est de la RDC, alors qu'ils cherchaient à stabiliser la situation. Nous notons le rôle de Madame Bintou Keïta, chef de la MONUSCO. Toutefois, dans ces conditions, la MONUSCO demeure otage de cette escalade d'affrontements entre les États de la région. La MONUSCO, depuis près d'un an, depuis l'escalade de janvier, se trouve dans cette situation suite aux actions du M23. Plus de 40% du personnel de la mission est enfermé dans les faits, dans les complexes de l'ONU, dans un territoire qui est contrôlé par le M23 dans le Nord-Kivu. Nous avons rappelé que cette situation était inacceptable et ne devait pas durer. Toutefois, certains collègues du Conseil et appuyés par certains membres du secrétariat nous ont convaincus qu'il fallait attendre encore un peu et que le résultat de la médiation internationale permettrait de ressusciter la MONUSCO. La mission aurait pu jouer un rôle important d'appui au règlement de la crise, notamment s'agissant du suivi du régime de cessation des hostilités. Toutefois, au vu de l'évolution de la situation dans le Sud-Kivu, il est évident que les conditions ne sont pas réunies aujourd'hui. Il aurait fallu se dépêcher et proposer des solutions extraordinaires plus tôt. Aujourd'hui, il faut être extrêmement prudent. Tout amendement majeur dans le mandat de la MONUSCO doit tenir compte de la situation réelle sur le terrain et se faire fond sur des recommandations précises et détaillées du secrétariat. Seule cette approche permettra à la mission de reprendre ses activités. Nous sommes prêts, je le souligne, à travailler avec les collègues du Conseil pour formuler des instructions à l'intention du secrétariat pour qu'il nous présente des options de participation de la MONUSCO à la surveillance du régime de cessez-le-feu et pour permettre une adaptation de la mission au vu de la situation actuelle. Toutefois, nous n'acceptons pas des initiatives mal élaborées qui ne tiennent pas compte de la réalité. Imposer ces solutions pour des raisons politiques ne fait qu'aggraver la situation de la MONUSCO et entame encore plus avant la réputation des opérations de paix. Je vous remercie. Je remercie la Fédération de Russie. Je donne la parole au Royaume-Uni.
Thank you, President. My thanks to our briefers who have brought helpful clarity and insights to our discussions, and I welcome the participation in today's meeting of Her Excellency, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Democratic Republic of Congo, as well as the representatives of Rwanda and of Burundi. And I thank the chair of the 1533 committee for his update. President, I will make 3 points. First, the United Kingdom welcomes the signing last week of the Washington Accords and the signing of the Framework Agreement in Doha last month. We commend the leadership of the United States, Qatar, and of the African Union in driving these efforts. We call on the parties to implement the agreements and to honour their commitments in full. Second, we are deeply concerned that despite progress on the political tracks, violence has increased in South-Kivu. We condemn the recent M23 offensive and takeover of Uvira with the support of the Rwandan Defence Forces. The UK urges an immediate cessation of hostilities and for all parties to fully comply with Security Resolution 2773. There can be no military solution to this conflict. This escalation in fighting has worsened an already dire humanitarian situation, which will only further deteriorate as refugees flee across the border into Burundi following M23's latest offensives. We are greatly concerned by continued reports of human rights violations and abuses, including conflict-related sexual violence, on which we have heard tragic testimony from Médecins Sans Frontières today. Perpetrated by the parties to the conflict, and in particular by M23 and Wazalendo. The United Kingdom calls on the parties to fully comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law, including ensuring the protection of civilians. Third, the United Kingdom reiterates our full support for MONUSCO. The mission continues to play a vital role, especially in supporting the protection of civilians. We also express our support for a MONUSCO role in ceasefire monitoring to embed the progress towards peace and security made through the political process. It is critical that MONUSCO is able to deliver its mandate without hindrance. We again call for M23 to lift all obstructions to the mission's operations. We urge all parties to ensure MONUSCO's freedom of movement in compliance with the decisions of this Council. President, the UK calls on all parties to now seize the opportunity to deliver the peace, prosperity, and security that the people of Eastern DRC so deserve. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for her statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Allow me to begin by expressing our appreciation to Monsieur Jean-Pierre Lacroix, as well as to Dr. Mohamed Javed Abdelmonem, International President of Médecins Sans Frontières, for their valuable briefings. Your work on the ground, saving lives in the midst of so much violence is so important, and we express our condolences for your staff members that have lost their lives in their service. We also welcome the presence of the distinguished permanent representatives of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda, and we welcome the permanent representatives of Rwanda at this session. Panama highlights the recent diplomatic progress, including the peace agreement between the DRC and Rwanda, which was reached in June 2025, facilitated by the United States, as well as the framework agreed in Doha between the government of the DRC and the M23, signed on the 15th of November 2025. However, the reality on the ground reminds us that the signing of agreements does not equate with peace. What we heard from USG Lacroix and from Médecins Sans Frontières makes it clear that while we're talking here, hundreds of thousands of lives are hanging by a thread. The current situation that MONUSCO is facing in Goma is a source of serious concern, particularly due to the restrictions affecting its operational capacity. In this context, it is essential to guarantee full freedom of movement for its personnel and to ensure the implementation of its mandate, as well as respect for international law, in order to preserve the safety of its staff and the continuity of its operations. Furthermore, Panama underscores the importance of the full implementation of the transition, as well as of the sanctions regime renewed through Resolution 2783. This is a key tool to reduce the operational capacity of armed groups, combat illicit economies, and pressure all actors to comply with their obligations. Mr. President, our delegation particularly welcomes the formal approval of the Regional Economic Integration Framework signed by the Presidents of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the Republic of Rwanda on the 4th of December in Washington, D.C. We believe that this progress represents a genuine opportunity to bring to an end more than a decade of conflict and suffering in the region if it is implemented on time and respected by all the parties. Renewed violence is only making it difficult to grasp this great opportunity for peace. Nevertheless, more than 7 million people remain internally displaced, and the most recent reports reveal that over 80% of health centers in Nord-Kivu and Sud-Kivu lack essential medicines and the necessary personnel to serve the entire population. And we continue to closely follow the recent fall of the city of Uvira, and we agree with the concerns already expressed by the members of this council in that regard. This situation, aggravated by advances of the M23, attacks on infrastructure and the severe humanitarian funding gap, place thousands of people at risk who require urgent treatment for diseases such as malaria, HIV, and tuberculosis, which disproportionately affect women, girls, and boys. Panama would make an urgent appeal to donors to close the funding gap of the 2025 Humanitarian Response Plan and to strengthen operational capacities on the ground. The protection of humanitarian staff must be given priority, and this aid must not be politicized, and it must arrive without restrictions to those that most need it. The presence of MONUSCO remains crucial for the protection of civilians and for supporting the Congolese government's efforts in the area of security, governance, and stabilization. This Council has reiterated that the withdrawal of the mission must be gradual, responsible, and conditions-based, not driven by rigid timelines. The drawdown of troops and flexible funding will produce effects that are contrary to what is desired. Mr. President, the Congolese people have paid an unacceptable price for decades due to regional instability, competition over resources, and the absence of strong institutions. Panama is convinced that there is no military solution to this crisis. Only a combination of national political will, genuine regional commitment that is sincere and sustained support and unified support from this Council will make it possible to transform the potential of the Democratic Republic of the Congo into a reality of peace and development and prosperity for its population. Thank you very much.
Representative of Panama for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je remercie le secrétaire général adjoint Lacroix, le président du comité de sanctions, M. Kanou, et le docteur Abdelmonem de leurs exposés. Je salue la présence de la ministre des Affaires étrangères, son Excellence Mme Wagner, ainsi que les représentants du Rwanda et du Burundi lors de la présente séance. L'actuelle situation dans l'est de la RDC reste tendue. Le conflit, les violences ont déclenché une grave crise humanitaire. La communauté internationale doit faire des efforts concrets en faveur de la désescalade. Je ferai 3 commentaires. Premièrement, il est nécessaire de mettre un terme immédiatement aux hostilités. Le M23 a lancé une vague d'offensives ces derniers jours, capturé des villes clés telles qu'Ouvira, ce qui a conduit à une vive escalade des tensions sur le terrain. La Chine est vivement préoccupée par l'évolution de la situation et condamne fermement les violences perpétrées par le M23. Nous exhortons le M23 à appliquer la résolution 2773 du Conseil de sécurité ainsi que les différents accords de paix, à cesser immédiatement les hostilités, à se retirer d'Ouvira et d'autres villes et à cesser toute expansion de sorte à prévenir d'autres débordements du pays. Les acteurs externes devraient cesser toute forme de soutien aux groupes armés dans l'est de la RDC et tendre à une désescalade. Toutes les parties au conflit doivent respecter le droit international humanitaire, protéger les civils, y compris les citoyens étrangers, et lever toutes les restrictions à l'infrastructure et l'accès humanitaire cruciaux. La Chine appuie pleinement les efforts du gouvernement de la RDC visant à préserver sa souveraineté, son indépendance et son intégrité territoriale afin de rétablir l'autorité nationale dans l'est de la RDC dans les plus brefs délais. Deuxièmement, un dialogue sincère. Des négociations sont essentielles. Il n'y aura pas de règlement militaire du conflit dans l'est de la RDC. Un règlement politique est la seule issue. Même si les parties au conflit récemment ont signé plusieurs accords de paix, la situation sur le terrain ne s'est guère améliorée. La priorité désormais doit être la bonne volonté politique des parties et le respect des engagements pris. Les médiateurs, quant à eux, devraient également assumer leurs responsabilités de suivi. Toutes les parties devraient exhorter le M23 à négocier davantage avec la RDC, à parachever les protocoles de l'accord cadre de Doha et faire en sorte que le suivi du cessez-le-feu, les mécanismes de vérification soient rendus opérationnels dans les plus brefs délais. Nous saluons la contribution de l'Union africaine et des organisations infrarégionales qui ont contribué à la paix dans l'est de la RDC. Et ce processus doit se faire en coordination avec l'Union africaine dont le rôle doit être respecté dans l'est de la RDC. Troisièmement, la capacité de la mission de maintien de la paix à exécuter son mandat doit être garantie. À l'heure actuelle, la MONUSCO fait face à des restrictions dans sa liberté de circulation, à une suspension de l'approvisionnement en eau, en électricité, à une réduction des effectifs et du financement. Et la MONUSCO ne peut plus assumer que des missions de base. Toutes les parties devraient lever les restrictions imposées à la MONUSCO et parallèlement, il faudrait procéder à une évaluation circonstanciée des difficultés empêchant l'exécution du mandat afin de trouver des solutions. La MONUSCO peut jouer un rôle pour appuyer le processus de paix dans l'est de la RDC, notamment avec la vérification du cessez-le-feu. Toutefois, toute modification du mandat de la MONUSCO doit se faire en fonction de la situation sur le terrain avec un plan faisable et des résultats réaliste avec une évaluation approfondie du secrétariat. Toute décision hâtive ou le fait de traiter le mandat de la MONUSCO comme une carte blanche ne feront que nuire aux activités inscrite dans le mandat de la MONUSCO et saper la crédibilité tant de la mission que du Conseil. La MONUSCO est une mission de maintien de la paix de l'ONU. Ces activités doivent se faire dans le respect de la charte et être le reflet de la volonté commune des États membres. La Chine appuie pleinement la MONUSCO dans l'exercice de ses fonctions. Monsieur le Président, la situation dans l'est de la RDC est à un tournant. La communauté internationale devrait mettre de côté des calculs géopolitiques, dégager un consensus en faveur de la paix et unir ses forces avec toutes les parties et sincèrement s'engager en faveur de la paix, du développement et de la prospérité dans la région. En tant qu'ami des pays de la région, la Chine reste déterminée à travailler avec toutes les parties afin de parvenir à un règlement du conflit et de parvenir à la paix et la stabilité dans l'est de la RDC. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président. Je remercie la Chine de sa déclaration et donne la parole à la Grèce.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to start by thanking our briefers, to welcome Her Excellency the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as well as the representatives of Rwanda and Burundi to this meeting, and to thank the chair of 1533 committee for his update. Mr. President, almost a year since the dramatic escalation of the conflict in Eastern DRC, we meet at a moment of both fragile progress and persistent acute risks. Important steps have been taken, yet many decisive actions still lie ahead. I would like to stress the following points. First, we repeat that Resolution 2773 must be implemented immediately, fully, and unconditionally. We remain particularly alarmed by the deteriorating security situation in Sud-Kivu, driven by the continuing advance of the AFC M23 with the alleged support of the Rwandan Defense Forces and the risk of a spillover of the conflict that could trigger a regional crisis. AFC M23 must immediately cease hostilities and withdraw from Goma, Bukavu, and all other controlled areas. As the Council stressed in its recent press statement, all illegitimate parallel administrations must be dismantled, restoring state authority throughout the Democratic Republic of the Congo. In this context, we reiterate Greece's steadfast support for the independence, sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of the DRC. Second, we welcome all efforts towards a ceasefire and a sustainable peace, stability, and reconciliation in Eastern DRC, and commend the United States and Qatar for their critical mediation efforts. We congratulate President Tshisekedi and President Kagame for the signing of the Washington Peace Accords for Peace and Prosperity on December 4th, as well as the issuing of the joint declaration on the accords by the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda. We urge them to now accelerate the implementation of their commitments as provided by the accords. These gains must not be undermined by a new escalation in South Kivu by the M23. We also welcome the signing of the Doha Framework for Peace between the government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the AFC M23 on November 15th, and we urge them to materialize their commitment to a permanent ceasefire. Third, we are deeply concerned about the grave humanitarian and security consequences of the conflict both in North and South Kivu and in Ituri, as we have heard by our briefers today. All parties must respect international humanitarian law and ensure unrestricted humanitarian access and facilitate humanitarian flights as well. We are particularly concerned about the grave human rights violations and abuses committed against women and children, notably large-scale recruitment and use of children, abductions, killings and maimings, and shocking levels of sexual violence. All perpetrators of violations of international humanitarian law and of violations and abuses of human rights must be held accountable and be brought to justice. Finally, MONUSCO's freedom of movement must be unobstructed and its ability to operate must remain unrestricted. Resolution 2773 reiterates the Council's full support for MONUSCO, whose works remains critical in the DRC in protecting civilians, responding to urgent humanitarian needs, and supporting the implementation of the peace process. We emphasize once more our strong commitment to the safety and security of MONUSCO's personnel. Madam President, as the Council considers the upcoming renewal MONUSCO's mandate, Greece stands ready to work closely with all members to ensure that the mission can continue fulfilling its critical role at this pivotal juncture for the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank USG Lakwa, Ambassador Kanu, and Dr. Abdel Moneim for their briefings, and also welcome Her Excellency Ms. Therese Kaira Amba Wagner, DRC's Foreign Minister, and the representative of Rwanda and Burundi to this meeting. To begin, we strongly condemn the M23's recent advance in Uvira in South Kivu, a serious development which risks further escalating the conflict across the region. The unanimously adopted Resolution 2773 demands that M23 immediately cease all hostilities, withdraw from all controlled areas, and the Rwanda Defense Force and its support of M23. We urge all parties to fully and immediately implement this urgent call from Security Council. I'd like to highlight following 3 points. First, the conflict cannot be resolved by the force under any circumstances. In this regard, we welcome the ongoing efforts toward a political solution, including the Washington Accords for Peace and Prosperity, signed on 4 December between the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda, and welcome the United States mediation efforts. We urge all parties to faithfully implement their commitments. We also recognize the efforts of Qatar and African Union to advance both Washington and Doha processes. Regional cooperation is indispensable for the sustainability of the agreement. We encourage this political process to be closely aligned with regional mechanisms, including ICGLR. Second, while our expectations should remain high, they must take into account the reality on the ground. In this regard, we are deeply concerned by the recent offensive expansion of M23 and discouraged by the local community's continuing voice. Nothing has changed. Armed groups such as ADF and Codeco, which are not parties to the ongoing peace processes, continue to carry out attacks against civilians and civilian facilities, including hospital and church. Such attacks must stop immediately. We also call on the DRC government and MONUSCO to redouble their efforts, not only to disarm, dismobilize, but also to reintegrate their armed groups. The situation on humanitarian front is also alarming. 5.7 million people remains internally displaced, and food insecurity and medical conditions continue to worsen. Humanitarian assistance to those in need must be swiftly delivered. We condemn any actions that obstruct this effort. Third, MONUSCO's active role is more necessary than ever, particularly at a time when security conditions on the ground continue to contradict the parties' previous pledges. We expect MONUSCO to play a meaningful role in ensuring that the ongoing peace process are effectively implemented. To carry out its mandate fully and effectively, the mission must guarantee full freedom of movement and uninterrupted access to its operational infrastructure. I urge M23 to immediately lift all restrictions imposed on MONUSCO, including access to electricity, fuel, water, as well as troop rotations. We recall that under the Washington Accord, both DRC and Rwanda agreed to support and facilitate MONUSCO's capability to implement its mandate. We therefore urge all parties to translate their commitment into concrete action. Mr. President, the Republic of Korea remains firmly committed to a stable and peaceful DRC and support MONUSCO's vital role in this endeavor. In this vein, we will continue to remain engaged with developments in DRC and discussions on MONUSCO's forthcoming mandate renewal. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me also thank USG Lacroix and Médecins Sans Frontières for their briefings. And I would like to welcome the participation of Her Excellency Foreign Minister Wagner, as well as representatives of Rwanda and Burundi in this meeting. 2025 has been a year of major developments in the DRC. Despite consistent challenges on the ground, MONUSCO has continued to deliver. Denmark commends MONUSCO for its tireless efforts in support of peace in extremely difficult circumstances. Mr. President, allow me to raise 3 points. First, we commend the collective mediation efforts by the United States and Qatar, as well as the key role played by the President of Togo as the African Union appointed lead mediator and a panel of facilitators. We welcome the signing by the Presidents of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda of the Washington Accords on 4 December and the signing by DRC and the M23 of the Doha Framework for a Comprehensive Peace Agreement on 15 November. However, we are deeply concerned that the commitments made by these parties are not being upheld. Just this week, continued advances of the M23 AFC and the intensified clashes in Sud-Kivu resulted in mass casualties and destructions of civilian infrastructure. We call on all parties to refrain from further escalation and remind all parties of their obligations under international humanitarian law. We further urge M23 and the Rwanda Defense Forces to immediately halt offensive operations. In line with Resolution 2773, Denmark reiterates its call on Rwanda to withdraw its troops from eastern DRC and end its support to the M23, as well as we call on the DRC to cease its support for the FDLR. The latest developments strongly underline the need for an immediate cessation of hostilities, leading to a permanent and verifiable ceasefire. Second, Denmark remains concerned by the appalling human rights situation in eastern DRC. We condemn widespread reports of conflict-related sexual violence incidents, notably the use of rape and other forms of sexual violence, including against children. We strongly support the recommendations by the fact-finding mission on the DRC to integrate accountability and transitional justice into peace negotiations and strengthen efforts to prevent and punish conflict-related sexual violence. As we've heard from our civil society briefer today, these violations and abuses are taking place in the context of a catastrophic humanitarian situation. We reiterate our calls for unhindered and safe humanitarian access, including through Goma Airport. We welcome the pledges made on the Great Lake Conference in Paris in October and urge their rapid implementation. My final point, Mr. President. As we approach the renewal of MONUSCO's mandate, Denmark underlines our support for the mission, as well as the critical need for its presence for stability and the protection of civilians in eastern DRC. MONUSCO's mandate must reflect the current operational reality and respond to the situation on the ground, both with regard to possibilities for support to the peace processes and emerging protection needs. We thank the peacekeepers who put their life at risk in the DRC. We underscore that all parties must cease obstructions of the mission's operations and ensure its freedom of movement, resupply, and troop rotations. Let me conclude by expressing our deep appreciation of Special Representative Bintou Keita for her dedication and leadership during her time as head of MONUSCO. We look forward to the timely appointment of her successor at this critical time for the mission. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for her statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. We join colleagues in welcoming the presence of the Honorable Foreign Minister of the DRC to this meeting, as well as the representatives of Burundi and Rwanda. Pakistan thanks the briefers for the clear articulation of the situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, deeply complex and challenging as it is, yet with an opportunity now to improve things on ground. We appreciate the outgoing SRSG Bintu Keita for a job well done under extremely challenging circumstances. President, we commend all MONUSCO personnel for their professionalism and courage under extraordinarily difficult conditions. We pay solemn tribute to the peacekeepers who lost their lives, including those killed in the aftermath of the M23 takeover of Goma. Their services embody the highest ideals of the United Nations. The perpetrators of those attacks and their supporters must be held accountable. The situation in the Eastern DRC remains extremely volatile. The security environment has deteriorated sharply. Despite the commitments made in the Doha framework for a comprehensive peace agreement on a ceasefire, M23 continues its territorial expansion, including the recent takeover of Uvira. And despite the signing of the Washington Agreement, the AFC M23 continue to receive external support. It is essential that commitments made under these agreements are implemented. We call for an immediate ceasefire and complete cessation of hostilities. It is regrettable that Resolution 2773 remains unimplemented. Nearly 40% of MONUSCO's area of oppression is under the control of the AFC M23. MONUSCO's movements in these territories are severely restricted. Its supply chains disrupted and troop rotations remain difficult. These conditions prevent the mission from implementing its mandate, particularly the protection of civilians. It is unacceptable that armed groups have imposed parallel administrations and stopped utilities of the UN personnel. We condemn these actions unequivocally. M23 must allow MONUSCO to perform its mandate assigned by this Council. It is equally important to address this situation in the context of the current mandate renewal of the mission. The mission must be given mandates that are realistic, achievable, and aligned with realities on ground. MONUSCO, as the only credible and impartial force, is uniquely positioned to play a central role in promoting peace and stability in the DRC. The Council should leverage MONUSCO's institutional experience, logistical reach, and operational presence. It is thus best placed to performing critical tasks, including monitoring and verifying a ceasefire once it is in place. The discussions on MONUSCO's potential ceasefire monitoring role in Sud-Kivu are also important. Pakistan, as one of the largest troop contributing countries to Sud-Kivu, had earlier cautioned that the withdrawal from Sud-Kivu was premature and might create a security vacuum. Regrettably, that assessment has proven correct. This also underscores the need to meaningfully consult those who serve on the ground. Decision-making on mandates and adjustments must better integrate the views of troop and police contributing countries and field leadership. It is also imperative the mandates be matched with commensurate resources. MONUSCO's budget was reduced by $45.3 million, leading to the repatriation of over 700 troops. A subsequent 25% contingency planning further decreased the mission strength by 1,550 personnel. And while the authorized troop ceiling remains at 11,500, MONUSCO currently has only around 8,234 troops on ground. This stark mismatch between the mission's responsibilities and shrinking resources must be urgently addressed to ensure that MONUSCO can effectively deliver on the tasks entrusted to it by the Security Council. President, Pakistan welcomes the recent diplomatic momentum aimed at achieving peace in the Eastern DRC. We appreciate Qatar for facilitating the Doha framework between the DRC government and M23. We also welcome the United States leadership in facilitating the Washington Agreement, signed on 4th December, as a historic step towards regional de-escalation and improved relations between the DRC and Rwanda. Pakistan further commends the African Union-led process under the mediation of Togo, which seeks to harmonize the Luanda and Nairobi tracks into a coherent African-led framework. We agree with Under-Secretary General Lacroix that the gap between the political and diplomatic efforts and the real impact on ground risks undermining these efforts. These processes must strive to address the root causes of the conflict in the DRC for lasting peace and stability. We reaffirm our support for the UN Special Envoy for the Great Lakes region, whose role remains crucial in ensuring coordination and complementarity among these parallel efforts. It is essential that all peace initiatives remain mutually reinforcing and regionally supported and backed by the Security Council and grounded in safeguarding the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC. Finally, we urge the parties to demonstrate political will, to engage in serious dialogue and fulfill their obligations, and avail this opportunity that is presented currently by the high level of international engagement and support to realize sustainable peace in the region. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as representative of Slovenia. I thank Under-Secretary General Lacroix and Ambassador Kanu for their updates. We are grateful to Dr. Abdel Monem for his uncompromising frontline testimony. What we heard today must be yet another wake-up call. The human cost of this conflict is laid bare before us, stark, undeniable, and worsening by day. We welcome also the presence of the Minister Wagner from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as well as the representatives of Burundi and Rwanda. Slovenia remains alarmed by the continued sharp escalation of hostilities in eastern DRC, some unfolding even as this Council meets. These developments run directly counter to this Council's decision, in particular Resolution 2773. We welcome intensified diplomatic efforts by the US, Qatar, and African Union, including the signing of the Washington Accords and the Doha Framework for Peace. These diplomatic tracks hold promise, but must be translated into verifiable steps by all parties. As Slovenia has consistently stressed, no progress is possible without silencing the guns. And we agree with Under-Secretary General Lacroix, as well as with several colleagues, that declarations are not enough. Compliance must be demonstrated. Diplomacy must not be used as a shield behind which military gains continue. We call on all parties, Rwanda, the DRC, and the AFC M23, to fully and immediately uphold their commitments. The realities on the ground tell a different story. The latest advances of M23 in Sud-Kivu marks a dangerous widening of the conflict. Slovenia condemns these offensives. We call for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire in line with 2773, and we call on M23 and Rwanda Defense Forces to halt all offensive operations and withdraw. Civilians must not bear the burden of promises that are not honored. We condemn every attack on civilians, medical facilities, humanitarian personnel, and critical infrastructure, not only by M23, but also violence of ADF, Codeco, Zaire, CRP, FDLR, and other armed groups. MSF has just briefed on attacks on health centers, mass displacement, and the immense difficulty conducting life-saving operations. Dr. Abdelmonem, we follow MFS's life-saving work closely, including the unbearable realities of your teams confront daily. The reporting of sexual violence and the sentence that they are not feared but expected, as you just said, is truly shocking, is devastating. Slovenia condemns this brutality in the strongest possible terms. We call on all parties to implement concrete, verifiable measures to reduce harm to civilians, including ceasing all attacks and guaranteeing safe movements for humanitarian actors, including reopening of Goma and Kavumu airports. Slovenia expresses its full support for MONUSCO, and we thank Ms. Bintu Keita for all her efforts and leadership as SRSG and her field-focused diplomacy. As we approach MONUSCO's mandate renewal, the Council must carefully reflect on the current context and trajectories ahead. MONUSCO must remain appropriately equipped and positioned to navigate rapidly changing conditions, particularly in protection of civilians, support to peace processes, disarmament and demobilization, and human rights monitoring. Colleagues, the people of the DRC need and deserve more than perpetual crisis management. We are of the view that with restraint, responsibility, respect for international law, regional cooperation grounded in respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states, non-support to armed groups, and accountability, a path toward de-escalation, lasting peace remains possible. Thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Therese Kaikwamba Wagner, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation, Francophonie, and Congolese Diaspora of the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Président, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs les membres du Conseil, je vous remercie de me donner la parole pour l'examen du rapport du secrétaire général ainsi que pour l'examen du renouvellement du mandat de la MONUSCO. Je salue la qualité du rapport et je rends hommage au département des opérations de paix, aux acteurs humanitaires et à l'ensemble du personnel onusien qui, jour après jour, œuvrent à la protection des civils dans des conditions d'une extrême gravité, nous rappelant que la raison d'être de cette organisation est de défendre la dignité humaine, même lorsque les circonstances sont les plus adverses. Je salue également la présence ici et les contributions importantes du secrétaire général adjoint M. Lacroix, de la Sierra Leone en sa capacité de président du comité 1533, du président international de Médecins sans frontières et du représentant permanent du Burundi. Monsieur le Président, le 4 décembre dernier, à Washington, les présidents Félix-Antoine Tshisekedi Tshilombo et Paul Kagame ont signé un accord de paix facilité par les États-Unis d'Amérique sous le leadership du président Donald Trump. Cet accord, soutenu par les garants régionaux et internationaux, portait et porte l'espoir d'un tournant historique. Pourtant, moins de 24 heures après cette signature, les faits en contredisent les engagements pris. Bombardements, drones explosifs, avancées coordonnées autour d'Ouvira et dans la plaine de la Ruzizi. Il n'est pas acceptable qu'un accord solennel soit ainsi recusé dès le lendemain par ceux qui s'y étaient engagés. Ces actes remettent en cause la dynamique née à Washington et confirment ce que le rapport du secrétaire général souligne. Le cessez-le-feu exigé par la résolution 2773 n'est pas appliqué. Les attaques contre les civils persistent. L'accès humanitaire est entravé et la situation continue de se détériorer malgré les efforts diplomatiques. Excellence, la République démocratique du Congo a volontairement choisi la voie de la diplomatie. Ce choix n'est ni une concession ni un signe de fragilité. Il reflète notre sens des responsabilités et notre foi en des mécanismes multilatéraux qui, s'ils sont pleinement assumés, peuvent encore ramener la paix. Nous avons fait ce choix parce que nous croyons en l'engagement des États-Unis, facilitateur principal du processus de Washington, en la constance de l'État du Qatar, garant du processus de Doha, et en la valeur normative du processus de Luanda, dont les principes continuent de guider l'action de l'Union africaine, désormais conduite par la République togolaise. La RDC a agi de bonne foi, la RDC continue d'agir avec bonne foi. La diplomatie n'est pas pour nous un choix par défaut, elle est l'expression de notre responsabilité d'État et de notre respect du droit international. Monsieur le Président, Excellences, depuis le 4 décembre au soir, les positions autour de Gatagota, Ruvunge, Kaziba, Urarambo, Luvungi et le long de l'axe Kamanyola-Uvira ont été visées par des bombardements provenant des positions RDF M23. Des drones kamikazes ont frappé des zones civiles. Plus de 500 000 personnes ont été renouvellement déplacées. Le Sud-Kivu, déjà en fragilité, atteint un seuil de rupture. Ces faits sont documentés par les mécanismes humanitaires et confirmés par OCHA. Il crée également un risque majeur de régionalisation. Des tirs ont déjà touché le Burundi. Uvira n'est distante que de 30 km de Bujumbura. Aucun pays voisin ne peut être exposé à de telles attaques sans risque d'escalade. La stabilité régionale ne peut reposer sur la normalisation de violations aussi graves. Monsieur le Président, moins d'une semaine après la signature des accords de Washington, certains acteurs ont choisi de s'écarter des engagements librement acceptés. Le recours à des narratifs inversés et à une désinformation systématique pour attribuer à la République démocratique du Congo la responsabilité des attaques commises par la coalition RDF M23 est une stratégie désormais bien documentée par des mécanismes internationaux. Nous ne pouvons accepter que la manipulation devienne un instrument de politique régionale. Les faits sont têtus, les résolutions de ce Conseil le sont davantage. La vérité n'est pas négociable et le droit international ne peut être dévoyé pour légitimer l'agression. Les violations constatées contreviennent à la résolution 2773, à l'accord du 27 juin signé à Washington, à l'accord signé à Washington le 4 décembre, à la déclaration de principe et l'accord cadre de Doha et aux conditions même de la mise en œuvre du cadre d'intégration économique régionale aussi signé à Washington. Aujourd'hui, c'est la crédibilité de tous ces processus et de leurs garants qui est en jeu. Mr. President, Excellencies, members of...
Monsieur le Président, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs les membres du Conseil, nous arrivons à un moment de vérité. Soit l'ordre international accepte qu'il est ouvertement mis à l'épreuve par le Rwanda, ou le Conseil assume ses responsabilités. L'impunité dure depuis bien trop longtemps. Le peuple congolais ne peut subir le coup des engagements qui sont violés et des résolutions qui ne sont pas appliquées. Les faits sont clairs. Le cessez-le-feu exigé par la résolution 2773 n'a pas été respecté. Les forces étrangères, c'est-à-dire les forces de défense rwandaises, demeurent sur le sol congolais et les civils continuent à être ciblés. L'accès humanitaire est entravé, la désinformation est utilisée délibérément afin de faire porter la responsabilité à d'autres et de protéger les criminels. La crédibilité de tous les processus, Washington, Doha et la facilitation africaine, ne dépendent que d'un principe, la redevabilité. Sans conséquence, les accords n'ont aucun effet. Sans conséquence, l'engrenage de la violence se poursuivra. La résolution 2773 est pourtant très claire, mais ce qu'il manque, c'est une application de cette résolution, sans quoi elle ne saurait dissuader la violence, mais ne fait qu'inviter à la violence. Lorsque les violations ne sont pas punies, l'impunité devient la politique. La responsabilité de ce Conseil n'est pas de redire ses décisions, mais de les faire appliquer.
La résolution 2773, le constat est implacable. Une nouvelle ville est tombée, une administration parallèle s'est consolidée, des milliers de familles supplémentaires ont fui, d'autres ont été tuées, violées, terrorisées. Et même la MONUSCO, casque bleu, personnel civil, leadership, a été pris pour cible. Pendant ces 9 mois, ce Conseil n'a pris aucune mesure concrète pour faire respecter sa propre résolution et pour défendre sa propre mission. Des appels, des avertissements, mais aucun acte. Ce vide d'action a permis au Rwanda de poursuivre et d'étendre ses opérations dans un environnement où les violations ne rencontrent aucune conséquence. Le moment est venu pour ce Conseil d'affronter une question essentielle. Comment, en 3 décennies de crise, l'absence de mesures coercitives a-t-elle contribué à la persistance de ces violations? Monsieur le Président, la résolution 2773 demeure la boussole de l'engagement onusien. Elle doit être appliquée dans toute sa portée, sans ambiguïté ni exception. La RDC appelle à un mandat robuste, cohérent et adapté aux réalités du terrain, et protecteur de l'autorité de ce même Conseil. Le mandat renouvelé doit garantir la protection des civils, réaffirmer le retrait des forces étrangères, soutenir les opérations humanitaires, inclure explicitement la protection des casques bleus, du personnel civil et du leadership de la MONUSCO, condamner toute attaque contre eux et empêcher tout contournement des décisions du Conseil. Car en effet, l'obstruction du mandat des Nations Unies par le Rwanda et le M23 ne peut jamais justifier son affaiblissement. Ce Conseil ne peut céder face à ceux qui le défient et qui défient son autorité. Monsieur le Président, la RDC est un pays africain. Elle fait aussi pleinement partie de la communauté internationale. Nous respectons les solutions africaines aux problèmes africains. Mais cela ne peut devenir un relativisme juridique permettant de contourner les normes universelles. Il n'existe pas de version régionale des droits de l'homme ou de la souveraineté. Toute solution durable doit s'appuyer sur les principes universels de la Charte des Nations Unies. Monsieur le Président, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs les membres du Conseil, le peuple congolais a choisi la paix. Il l'a demandée, il l'a négociée, il l'a signée. Il ne doit pas payer le prix de la mauvaise foi de ceux qui tournent le dos à leurs engagements. La paix ne peut reposer sur des promesses non tenues. Le peuple congolais a droit à la sécurité, à la justice et au respect du droit international. Ce Conseil doit agir pour que ces droits ne restent pas théoriques, mais deviennent enfin une réalité. C'est pourquoi la République démocratique du Congo appelle ce Conseil à mettre en œuvre intégralement la résolution 2773. Imposer des sanctions ciblées contre les responsables militaires et politiques de l'agression, instaurer un embargo total sur les minerais exportés comme rwandais, révoquer le statut de contributeur de troupes du Rwanda aux opérations de maintien de la paix des Nations Unies et établir un régime de notification systématique pour tout transfert d'armes vers le Rwanda. Les garants de Washington, de Doha et de la facilitation africaine doivent également assumer leurs responsabilités. Ces accords ne survivront qu'à la condition d'une fermeté collective et cohérente. Il appartient désormais à la communauté internationale de faire respecter les engagements pris et de permettre enfin l'avènement d'une paix durable dans l'est de la République démocratique du Congo et dans toute la région des Grands Lacs. Je vous remercie.
I thank Her Excellency, Ms. Kaikwamba Wagner, for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Rwanda.
Mr. President, I thank you for giving me the floor, and allow me to begin by commending you for your effective leadership of the Council this month. I also extend Rwanda's appreciation to the Council members concluding their terms. Your service and contributions to the Council's work have been invaluable. I thank USG Rakurwa, Dr. Mohamed Javid, for their briefing and taking note of the Secretary General's report. I also acknowledge the statements made by those who spoke before me. As the Council considers MONUSCO's next mandate, Rwanda expects a mission that is clearly anchored in and reinforcing of the Washington Peace Agreement and the Doha Framework, both of which the Secretary General's report rightly identifies as the central avenues for a sustainable peace. The mandate must therefore prioritize strict impartiality and political neutrality, support to ceasefire implementation and political dialogue, robust human rights due diligence policy compliance, timely suspension and reporting mechanisms where required, refraining from offensive operations against parties formally engaged in political processes, and a realistic resource-conscious focus on stability, accountability, and political solutions. These priorities reflect the realities outlined in the Secretary General's report. MONUSCO's effectiveness will depend on aligning its operations with the political tracks that offer the only viable path forward. The Washington Peace Agreement and the Doha process are complementary, mutually reinforcing frameworks. When the mission supports them consistently and impartially, it can help to create the necessary space for implementation. Rwanda reiterates its full commitment to implement its part of the agreement. We equally believe that the success of the agreement will depend on the political will of both parties. Mr. President, the recent situation in Sud-Kivu has been extensively discussed, and allow me a moment to also address it. And I will address some of the issues that may logically attract a question. Why am I addressing them? But there is a background to that. In 1994, in this chamber, Ambassador Kovac of Czech Republic, Ambassador Keateng of New Zealand, Ambassador Gambari of Nigeria spoke that Rwandans were being exterminated. That an ethnic group in Rwanda was being exterminated. They had never been to Rwanda, but they discharged their responsibility, confronted denial and silence that was taking place in this chamber to call the genocide for what it was as it was happening in Rwanda. So I'm here today and I survive today because those courageous diplomats discharged their duty. I wanted to do it. The situation in Sud-Kivu and the general situation obtaining after the Washington Agreement is a collection of many situations. The ceasefire that was repeatedly broken by the DRC government, that not only broke the ceasefire, but announced they would never stop attacks. Air attacks are offensives too. Even as the diplomatic tracks move forward, the situation on the ground in Sud-Kivu continues to deteriorate in ways this council cannot morally or legally ignore. Over the past year, and in reality since 2017, the Banyamulenge, a Tutsi Kinyarwanda-speaking community of the DRC, have endured a well-documented, systematic, and escalating persecution. I just want to address this area alone, among many things that put together cause the situation we are in. Allow me to highlight just a few incidents which are part of this sustained and systematic campaign of persecution of the Banyamulenge Kinyarwanda-speaking Tutsi ethnic group. Since 2017, more than 85% of Banyamulenge villages in Sud-Kivu were destroyed. An estimated 700,000 cattle, which is their economic lifeline, were raided and killed. On August 25th of 2025, Wazalendo militias and RDC issued a 10-day ultimatum demanding that all Banyamulenge leave Uvira or be killed. The ultimatum further prohibited them from accessing markets, water points, and other essential means of survival. On the 4th of September 2025, the decision was made to deny the Banyamulenge civilians access to public water points on the grounds that they were enemies. From the 5th to 8th of September 2025, Banyamulenge civilians were abducted and shot, while the mobs chanted for the end of the Banyamulenge. These are early warnings, indicators of atrocity crimes, discrimination, dehumanization, forced displacement, and the denial of basic services. Tens of thousands of Burundian soldiers were deployed into Sud-Kivu on the invitation of the government of the DRC. This is in addition to the presence of FDLR, mercenaries, Wazalendo, and the other militias. These troops established coordinated military blockades which exacerbated the situation above. Their operations alongside RDC, FDLR, and the affiliated militias imposed a siege on the Banyamulenge population. And I wanted to highlight here that there are other ethnic groups in that area. There are Babembe, Bafurero. There is another ethnic group that I don't remember. But these conditions I'm describing were imposed only on Banyamulenge Tutsi ethnic group. Banyamulenge, yes. The operations alongside FARDC and the FDL and the affiliated militias imposed a siege on the Banyamulenge population, resulting in nearly a year of the communities in the Minembwe Highlands being deprived of food, medicine, and humanitarian access. This situation was exacerbated by the coordinated military blockades. On the 16th to 18th of October 2025, the only road to the Mitamba market was closed, cutting off food supplies to civilians. On the 6th of September 2025, a group of 80 to 100, between 80 and 100 Banyamulenge civilians, mostly women, returning with food for their starving families, were ambushed by a FARDC Burundian Mai Mai coalition, and reports indicate killings, torture, and sexual violence. Equally well known, but disregarded, is the scale of air attacks carried out by DRC government forces and their allies, which continue to affect civilians already under siege. Among many others are the following. On the 29th of August 2025, and multiple dates, repeated drone strikes hit the outskirts of Banyamulenge IDP camps around Mikenya. On the 27th of September 2025, a Burundian CH-4 drone bombed Nzibira in Sud-Kivu. On the 15th of November 2025, Kinshasa operated drones bombed Mikenya, a village hosting Banyamulenge internally displaced persons. Between March and December this year, there has been 50 air attacks in this area. No one is speaking about this. I will appreciate the situation another day if we can be told this didn't happen. We have raised this, at least I did, with some members of the council, individually. We have raised this in this chamber. Nothing was done. The government of the DRC, as an inviting authority, should be responsible for the action and the conduct on the ground of Burundian forces and their allies. Rwanda has not been silent. I just said this. Rwanda has not been silent in the face of these developments. Our Minister of Foreign Affairs has raised the blockade directly with the mediators, the United States and Qatar, the representatives of the European Union and the African Union. And I have just said that I raised it with individual members of the Council. I raised it with the pen holder, with some presidencies, with the heads of some mechanisms in the region, and nothing happened. Taking into account the factual situation and the wider context of hate ideology in DRC, and the inherent legal and moral obligation, allow me to ask the question. Has the Security Council not been aware of this situation? Or did it not? Did this situation not merit your attention? The situation in Sud-Kivu, as we address it, we must consider what was the situation before the recent escalation. As a former investigator myself, there is what we call recreating the scene. From where we sit, we can only tell you the facts. But the Security Council can, among the wide possibilities you have, to recreate this scene. Choose to recreate it. But that is how it will look. All the principles that we have spoken about, sovereignty, territorial integrity, Rwanda is part of that multilateral belief that must be respected. But the existence of FDLR threatens all of that. Yes, facts are stubborn. Resolutions are more stubborn. And in the resolutions, one stubborn fact is that DRC government has, for the past 30 years, supported the FDLR. FDLR does not just threaten the territorial integrity of Rwanda, it threatens the very existence of Rwanda and its people. One of my uncles paid money in 94, so he could be killed by the bullet. Because there was that situation, you either choose to be shot or you die by a machete. One of my uncles paid money to be killed by a bullet. So everyone can make a decision not to care about the situation of Rwanda and the threat we face. All these people that I'm talking on behalf of, because nobody else does, in the situation they face. But do we also ask them to be participants in their own situation, to be part of the plan for their own extermination? Can we go that far? So to conclude, honorable members of distinguished members of the Council, we thank the mediators. We thank them very much. And we thank most profoundly the efforts that are going on by the mediators, particularly the United States, to address the most recent situation. And we are a willing participant to finding a viable solution forward, because we believe if we all commit to implementing in good faith the commitments we made in Washington, and if we support fully the process in Doha, then we possibly have a possibility to have a peaceful solution to the conflict that we have lived with for many, many years. This problem has gone on for too long, and it is our request and our appeal that we should all focus to supporting the present avenues for a peaceful solution. I will not go into what we said in the past. We have been here many times. Why do we have defensive measures and how are they going to be lifted? All those issues are addressed in the agreements, and we shall continue to work with mediators and to make sure that we meet our part of the challenge. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Rwanda for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Burundi.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, je voudrais d'abord féliciter la Slovénie pour sa présidence du mois et pour avoir mis ce briefing sur la MONUSCO à l'agenda du Conseil de sécurité. Le Burundi remercie le secrétaire général pour la présentation de son rapport et salue les efforts constants de la MONUSCO qui travaille dans des conditions extrêmement complexes. Nous apprécions également l'occasion qui nous est donnée de partager notre analyse de la situation sécuritaire et voudrions attirer l'attention du Conseil sur l'évolution dramatique de la situation sécuritaire et humanitaire, en particulier la ville d'Uvira et ses environs, et les déplacements massifs des populations avec de milliers de réfugiés se trouvant au Burundi, notamment dans la province Bujumbura, en commune de Cibitoke. Le Burundi souhaite dénoncer la violation répétée et répétitive de la résolution 2773 manifestée par la prise d'Uvira par l'armée rwandaise. Ces opérations ont visé et entraîné des victimes civiles innombrables. Nous sommes particulièrement préoccupés par les attaques transfrontalières, y compris l'usage d'artillerie, de drones et d'autres moyens létaux dont certains ont atteint des localités du territoire burundais. Ces actes violent la souveraineté du Burundi, compromettent la sécurité des populations civiles et fragilisent les efforts collectifs de paix. Nous pensons que le moment exige de la lucidité, du courage politique et un engagement collectif en faveur de la mise en œuvre pleine et entière des résolutions du Conseil de sécurité, en particulier la résolution 2773. Les engagements récemment pris, y compris ceux entérinés dans les accords signés à Washington, doivent être respectés par toutes les parties, sans ambiguïté et sans conditions préalables. Dès lors, nous appelons le Conseil à, premièrement, veiller à ce que les résolutions du Conseil soient appliquées de manière impartiale, car la crédibilité collective de ce Conseil dépend de sa capacité à garantir leur mise en œuvre effective. La pertinence et la crédibilité de la MONUSCO sont en jeu. Deuxièmement, protéger les civils, surtout les femmes et les enfants, qui demeurent les principales victimes d'un conflit qui leur a été imposé. Nous appelons le Conseil, troisièmement, à plaider pour une assistance humanitaire d'urgence face à la dégradation de la situation humanitaire et au manque criant des moyens aux agences du système des Nations Unies pour répondre aux besoins élémentaires des réfugiés installés à Gatumba et à Cibitoke. Nous appelons également le Conseil à convoquer une réunion d'urgence du Conseil dans laquelle il pourrait prendre des mesures robustes visant à stopper cette escalade dangereuse et pouvant comprendre un embargo sur les armes et un régime de sanctions économiques afin d'empêcher la poursuite de ces opérations militaires meurtrières en violation du droit international et de la Charte des Nations Unies en particulier. Nous appelons également le Conseil à appuyer la RDC et les États voisins dans des efforts coordonnés de lutte contre les groupes armés dans le strict respect des frontières internationales reconnues. Nous appelons enfin le Conseil à renforcer son soutien aux mécanismes régionaux de vérification et de suivi afin de documenter les violations, prévenir l'escalade et reconstruire la confiance. Par ailleurs, le Burundi souhaiterait informer cet auguste Conseil qu'il a pris très au sérieux le message des bombes envoyées à partir du Rwanda le 4 décembre sur le sol burundais, dans la commune de Cibitoke, blessant une femme et un enfant. Nous considérons cet acte comme une provocation grave et une manifestation d'une attitude belliqueuse que nous condamnons fermement. Je tiens à être clair, la retenue a des limites. Si ces attaques irresponsables devaient se poursuivre, il deviendrait extrêmement difficile d'éviter une escalade directe entre nos deux pays. Le Burundi ne pourra pas tolérer des violations répétées de son intégrité territoriale et se réserve le droit de faire usage de la légitime défense conformément à l'article 51 de la Charte des Nations Unies. Le Burundi reste un partenaire fiable pour la paix et la sécurité régionale. S'il a pu défendre les populations civiles avec hauteur dans toutes les missions où il a été déployé, le Burundi ne peut pas croiser ses bras face aux provocations et à la violation de son intégrité territoriale. Il ne peut pas croiser ses bras face aux attaques contre la population, sa population, et nous ne pouvons pas croiser nos bras face aux atteintes portées à la stabilité de nos frontières. Notre message aujourd'hui est donc un message d'appel à la mesure, à la fermeté contre les violations avérées et à une action concertée qui permette à l'est de la RDC et en particulier à des zones comme Uvira d'entrevoir enfin un avenir de paix durable. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Burundi for the statement. The representative of Rwanda has asked for the floor to make a further statement. Before giving him the floor, I just want to say that I don't want to prolong the exchanges, which will not help implement the agreements or the resolution 2773, and neither protect the civilians who are suffering. The council members have heard your messages very clear, and that's why I would ask you to take the floor only once. I give you the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I don't have any intention of unnecessarily prolonging the discussion. Just wanted to clarify that Rwanda is not waging war against the Republic of Burundi and has no intention of doing that. To the contrary, there has been an attack from the territory of Burundi to the area of Bugarama in Rwanda, and in some parts of the DRC, resulting into refugees coming to Rwanda. I believe the UNHCR is already involved in that process. So I wanted to make that clarification.
I thank the representative of Rwanda for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I now invite council members to informal consultations to continue our discussion on the subject. The meeting is adjourned.